Okay, so we live in this time where, I mean, objectively, we're connected constantly, right? You've got texting, social media feeds. Anyone you might want to reach is like just a tap away on your screen. And yet, and this is the big yet, our sources are showing this really deep, kind of harmful epidemic of loneliness, isolation.
It really is the central paradox of our digital lives, isn't it?
Right.
We pour all this energy into virtual connection, but then we report feeling, profoundly disconnected in the real world. And the research we're diving into today, it really points towards one specific, almost forgotten skill that's at the heart of this problem. And that's the essential art of, well, active listening.
Right. And that's really the mission for this deep dive. We need to get past the symptom, which is the loneliness, and dig into the root cause, which seems to be this erosion of our ability to pay sustained attention. Because if we can't truly listen, deeply listen, how can we form those genuine human connections we crave? So, okay, if the digital world is this huge barrier, we first need to understand the behavior we're up against. We have to start with just the sheer compulsion, the pull of our devices.
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating and honestly a bit disturbing to see how deep that habit goes now. Our sources actually draw this parallel. Think about how people used to instinctively reach for a cigarette, during anxious moments or just downtime, boredom.
And now it's the phone.
Now it's the phone.
Yeah.
Same impulse. And it's not just casual use, is it? The sources describe it as an addict-like compulsion. People get visibly, physically jittery if they don't have their phone nearby.
Yeah.
And that constant urge, that pull, it's driven by FOMO, right?
Yeah.
The fear of missing out. It just anchors our attention firmly in the virtual world.
Which makes paying sustained attention in the real world, well, almost impossible sometimes.
And the cost of that, even when we're just by ourselves, it's huge. Experts are pointing out that we're actually losing our capacity to daydream. That kind of internal free-floating thought that used to be linked with genius, with deep problem solving. If we can't even hold our attention internally for that kind of deep thought, how on earth can we hold it externally to truly take in what someone else is saying?
And the social data, it backs this up. Isolation is climbing right alongside screen time. One of the things that really jumped out from the research we looked at, teenagers today, they're spending way more time alone with their devices. They're actually less likely to do things like date or just hang out in person or even get a driver's license. Those are traditional milestones.
And study after study shows this really clear correlation. The more screen time, the higher the reported unhappiness. It's consistent. Which brings us right back to the core of this paradox. It was framed brilliantly by the French intellectual Pascal Buchner.
Right, Buckner's point. He argues that modern individualism, it puts way too much emphasis on projection, doesn't it? The value now is all about defining yourself, crafting this perfect narrative, and then broadcasting it out through that, virtual megaphone we all seem to carry.
Exactly. It's all output, very little input. The focus is on telling the world who you are, not really absorbing what others might be trying to share with you. So if your main job, socially speaking, is to build your brand, maintain that perfect online story, well, that diminishes the need, the social obligation to truly absorb, to listen to what other people are saying.
But hang on, is it all bad? I mean, doesn't shaping your narrative matter a bit for, say, your career or even just personal growth? Are the sources saying this is entirely negative?
No, not entirely harmful in itself, but it's become pathologically unbalanced. That's the argument. It tips into harmful territory when that projection completely overshadows absorption. The sources argue that when defining ourselves becomes more important than understanding others, we start treating conversations like stages for our own performance.
Instead of opportunities for connection.
Precisely. Instead of chances for mutual discovery, and ultimately that lack of deep absorption, that lack of really taking the other person in, it leaves both people feeling, well, profoundly disconnected.
Okay, so if the problem is this constant digital distraction and, always prioritizing our own voice, then the solution has to be about being more intentional. We need to get clear on what real listening even is, because the material we looked at makes a super clear distinction. Hearing, that's passive. Listening, that's active.
And active listening takes effort, real effort. It's an intentional practice, and it's rooted in one core thing. Genuine curiosity. It starts with the belief, maybe even the faith, that we actually have something significant, maybe unexpected, to learn from pretty much everyone we interact with, regardless of who they are.
Yeah, and this isn't some new idea, is it? This goes way back. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, he basically said, nature gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. And listening, when you do it actively, it can fundamentally change how you see the world.
And interestingly, This gets way harder when we're dealing with the people we're closest to. The sources talk about something called the closeness communication bias.
Okay, that sounds a bit academic, but it describes something really common, doesn't it? A common failure in our relationships.
Absolutely. The closeness communication bias. Yeah. It's basically our failure to listen deeply to the people we love the most. And why? Because we tend to rely on our memory of who they were in the past to understand who they are right now. We assume, often, without even realizing it, that we already know what they're going to say or why they feel a certain way.
So we stop listening properly because we think we've already got the script memorized, we know their lines.
Exactly. And that assumption is just,
Yes.
it's flawed. Because people change, right? They evolve. Their life story keeps moving forward, new pages turn. If you're trying to understand someone who's on chapter 10 based on your memory of chapter 1, you're completely missing their current reality.
Mm.
Listening is how we stay connected. It's the mechanism that keeps us tuned in as those pages turn in each other's lives.
Hmm. Okay, but if listening is so crucial, why does it feel so exhausting sometimes? Why do so many people say they find it hard? The sources highlight some pretty significant psychological hurdles that get in the way of deep engagement, even when we really want to listen well.
Well, the biggest one, identified by Ralph Nichols, he's often called the father of listening research, is that constant nagging worry about what we're going to say next. While the other person is still talking, we're already mentally drafting our brilliant response, our comeback, our next point.
Right. So that mental drafting process, it's basically like switching off our own receiver halfway through the conversation. We stop taking in what they're saying because our focus shifts inward to generating our response. We're just waiting for our turn to talk, not actually listening to understand them.
And then there's the distortion that comes from our own inner voice. Psychologist Charles Fernyhou's work really highlights this. The tone and quality of your internal self-talk dramatically changes how you interpret what other people say.
You mean like if someone has a really critical inner voice or an anxious one, they'll hear what other people say through that same negative filter?
Yes, exactly. That internal dialogue acts like a lens, and it can really warp what's being said. It can twist neutral comments, even positive ones, into perceived slights or criticisms. Often, it's less about the speaker's actual words and more about our own unconscious stuff bubbling up in response. This connects to what Theodore Rake called listening with the third ear. It's not just about hearing the words, but noticing the feelings, the reactions that rise up inside you as they speak.
Wow. Okay, this also has some big implications for how we talk about things in public, doesn't it? Especially controversial stuff. Good listeners, the sources say, need cognitive complexity, or what the poet John Keats called negative capability.
What's fascinating here is, negative capability. It's defined as the ability to hold two opposing or contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time without feeling this overwhelming urge to immediately resolve the tension or pick a side.
That sounds, well, frankly, revolutionary and incredibly necessary in today's climate, wouldn't you say?
It really is. Because if you can't handle contradictory ideas, you easily fall into insular thinking.
Right.
You start selectively listening, only tuning in to people or information that confirms what you already believe, and that just breeds distrust instantly. The sources point directly to the current political landscape, where you often see opponents refusing to even consider the logic behind an idea simply because of who proposed it.
Yeah, you contrast that kind of insular approach with, say, historical examples like Tip O'Neill, the Democratic speaker, and Ronald Reagan, the Republican president. They were famous for maintaining a personal relationship despite huge ideological differences. They listened to each other, maybe not always to agree, but to understand the political realities and the personal values driving the other person.
And you see that same spirit, that willingness to engage across divides with figures like the late Senator John McCain. They understood something crucial, that genuine listening, even when you deeply disagree, involves accepting the legitimacy of the other person's perspective, their reality. Carl Rogers, who pioneered active listening techniques, really hammered this home. Listening to opposing views isn't just some lofty political ideal. He argued it's the only way we can truly grow as individuals and actually strengthen our own convictions.
So when we actually manage to do it, when we commit to that sometimes difficult act of listening, the emotional return, the payoff, it's huge, it's transformative. The philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, he believed that listening and the understanding and empathy that flow from it is fundamental. It's what gives our lives meaning and direction.
Yeah, and you can see this principle working even in places you might not expect, like really data-driven corporate settings. Take Google's Project Aristotle study back in 2012, it was famous. They spent years trying to figure out what made their most successful teams tick. They assumed it would be about raw talent, IQ.
Yeah. But it wasn't about individual brilliance, was it? It turned out to be about how they communicated, the structure.
It was about listening. That was the key finding. The most effective teams they found were the ones where members spoke in roughly equal measure. They called it conversational turn-taking. And crucially, these teams had high average social sensitivity, meaning the members were good at picking up on nonverbal cues, understanding each other's feelings, the mood in the room.
And the genius there, I think, was that this consistent turn-taking, this feeling that everyone would get a chance to speak and be heard, created what they called a psychologically safe environment. Everyone felt safe enough to contribute, to take risks, to innovate.
Absolutely. Which makes listening, really, the engine of ingenuity. When we're genuinely open to what others have to say, it helps us combat what's called the solipsistic view of the world.
Solipsistic, meaning the assumption that everyone else thinks and feels pretty much like we do.
Exactly. The assumption that our experience is the universal experience. And, as the great jazz musician Miles Davis famously said, if you understood everything I said, you'd be me. The reality is the more deeply we listen, the more different facets of humanity we encounter, and the further we get pushed beyond our own limited viewpoint. Ultimately, the sources seem to conclude that giving someone your full, undivided attention, it might be one of the kindest, most generous things you can actually do for another person.
Yeah.
It's framed as the ultimate compliment, really.
Yeah, Henry David Thoreau captured that so well. He wrote that the greatest compliment he ever received was when someone asked him what he thought and attended to my answer. That act of attending, that's the gift. Love itself, in this context, is almost defined as listening deeply, wanting to be part of someone else's ongoing, evolving story. So it all circles back, doesn't it? Back to this central paradox of our hyperconnected age. Loneliness. It isn't just some vague sadness. It seems to be a direct symptom of not truly listening and therefore not feeling truly understood. We're just so busy projecting ourselves, talking, scrolling, that we miss the fact that genuine listening is actually the more powerful position in any communication.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, we're living in the era of big data, right?
Yeah.
Algorithms, metrics. We prioritize things we can count. Likes, followers, screen time minutes. These become our proxies for connection. But the sources pointedly remind us that what matters in life cannot be counted. Data sets, algorithms, they can only reveal patterns within the data they already have. They're inherently limited.
Right. Real connection, true understanding, that requires qualitative listening. It means going beyond the surface signals, beyond the metrics, to try and grasp the complex human being behind the screen or behind the rhetoric.
And that demands real intentionality from us. We have to become fiercely mindful about when and where we offer the gift of our attention. And maybe just as importantly, when we intentionally withhold it. We need to stop treating attention like it's just the default background setting and start seeing it as a precious, deliberate choice we make, moment by moment.
So let's leave you, the listener, with this final thought to mull over. The composer Gustav Mahler once suggested something like, what's best in music is not to be found in the notes. It's in the silence, the charged space between the notes. Maybe in our age of constant digital noise and quantifiable data points, we need to seek the deepest meaning not just in the flood of information being shared, but in the quiet, intentional space within human conversation. Because maybe that space is where real understanding and the true antidote to loneliness actually resides.